What's going on, everyone? This is Dom, and today we are getting into my first 48 hours with these two right here, the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, and really specifically just the 14 Pro, because at the end of the day, the only difference between the 14 Pro Max and the regular 14 Pro is going to be the screen size. So I personally choose to opt with the smaller version of the two. The 14 Pro Max is just way too big for me. That being said, let's get into my experience. So really, there are only a handful of things to discuss here when it comes to maybe reasons you should upgrade to this phone right here. But first off, let's talk about some of the reasons that really aren't there to make you upgrade. The design. It's mostly the same over last year's model. I mean, there's really not much different here other than the fact that you'll definitely have to buy new cases because the dimensions are just slightly different enough that it doesn't fit like all the cutouts and everything on there. So that's unfortunate. I wish we could just have a rollover year where all of our cases worked, but I guess then the case companies would make no money. Also, as far as performance goes this year, this thing is stupid fast. I mean, do we really have to say that every single year? Like, oh my gosh, it's the fastest iPhone ever. Yes, of course it's going to be the fastest iPhone ever, and the benchmarks and everything, the performance, just using the device in practice definitely showcases all of that. It's a fast phone, okay? Apple has done a lot in previous years with their own silicon, and they have it dialed in. Like, I just gotta say, they just have their whole ecosystem as far as the software optimization with the internal hardware that they include. Everything is just stupid fast. Another thing this year that might have some people uneasy is the fact that this phone, at least in the United States, is eSIM only. There is no physical SIM card tray on this, and that's not that big of a deal. It's really easy to swap between devices, between SIMs. At least that was in my experience going from one iPhone to another iPhone. The process is very simple, so that's really nothing you have to worry about. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that might be reasons you should upgrade to this device. And well, some of them are very subjective, but we have the dynamic island, the camera, and the always-on display. And those are basically my top three in terms of noticeable feature set changes with the iPhone 14 Pro. So let's talk about the dynamic island, because that seems to be a big point of conversation this year with the iPhone 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max. The dynamic island is just simply put cute. I mean, we have a lot of different cute animations that take just advantage of the screen real estate in a way that we haven't seen done before on a smartphone. It's a very intelligent and smart, clever way to kind of hide a cutout in the display that is making room for the sensors and the front-facing camera. And I think that it's definitely better than the notch, but it doesn't take up much less space than the notch. Yes, it does take up less space than a notch, but not by a ton. The real thing here is that they are utilizing what would normally be unused space to have information thrown at your face right when you need it. Like right up top of the screen, we can see like when music is playing or when a timer is set, things like that. It's utilizing that space in an intelligent way, and I've personally found it to be quite the joy to use. Like, it's not like we've never seen a cutout in terms of a smartphone display before, but we've never seen it utilized to display information on the sides of that kind of make it just disappear into the screen. Like, we don't really see the cutout anymore. We see the dynamic island with all this information that is popping up here or there. So I think that it was a very clever way for Apple to disguise that, all while not really doing a whole lot different with the whole idea of a cutout in a display, but it really does make everything seem so much more hidden in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, or, well, behind the display. Real quick though, I do want to give a huge shout out to Defy for sponsoring this video, and Defy's new lineup packs a ton of features to keep your iPhone 14 Pro safe, such as tension distribution and increased drop height with their twister design that will provide over 20% increased drop and abrasion protection over the previous models. These cases are also sustainable, made from 65% recycled and plant-based material, also partially upcycled from phone cases, which adds to the sustainability aspect. On top of that, the Ultra Impact case from Defy is tested up to 11.2 feet for drop protection proof, which is pretty amazing. Casetify also has a custom case maker page with a ton of prints to choose from and artist collaborations as well. The cases are also MagSafe compatible, and my experience of getting a Casetify case was definitely second to none. If you'd like to find out more about Casetify cases or make a cool custom case for yourself, definitely be sure to visit the link on the screen here or click the link down in the description to save 15% on your order. I definitely recommend Casetify, and a huge shout out to them for sponsoring this video. Another thing that we need to talk about in regards to the display is how it's been like having an always on display on an iPhone, because this is something that we've been actually waiting for quite some time. I mean, we've seen so many other brands pass up Apple in the always on display category that it just seems weird that we have one now on an iPhone. And what's weirder about it, is that it's not exactly what you would think. Like, we're not using just a lot of black and white on the screen. There's actually a ton happening on there. There's a lot more color than I would have expected, and the always on display is actually a lot brighter than I would have expected it to be as well. Now, obviously, battery life remains to be seen as far as how this will impact the battery long term. I know right now I can leave the always on display on and have it just sitting there for literally a day and it'll only knock off like 1% or 2%, but that is not telling the entire story about the long-term use with this and how that will end up affecting the battery. The good thing is, if you want to, if you're not a fan of it, you can always turn off the always on display within the settings app in the display settings. Now let's talk about the camera performance, because that is a big thing here, right? We have a 48 megapixel camera, and iPhone people for the longest time have always been like, megapixels don't matter, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? At the end of the day, they really don't. I mean, the megapixels here aren't making a huge difference, only because you're only utilizing that full 48 megapixels when you're shooting in Pro RAW on the iPhone. Now, the only thing is, even if you're shooting in Pro RAW, when you're in night mode, you're not getting the full 48 megapixels. And if you're shooting in just regular photo mode without Pro RAW, you're only getting the 12 megapixels, so that's something to definitely be aware of. And that's not that big of a deal, honestly. I mean, we are getting some downsampling that's happening, and I think that there's something to be said about being able to shoot 48 megapixels on an iPhone, especially in that RAW format where you have something that's very editable. And if you're somebody that likes to edit photos and take a lot of photos that you can edit right on your iPhone and use like Lightroom or something like that, this is definitely going to be a treat for you. And like I said, even though you can only take the 48 megapixel photos in Pro RAW, that doesn't mean that the camera system isn't seeing a massive upgrade. I definitely think year over, there's a big jump in terms of photo quality and everything like that. But I wouldn't maybe nail that down as a reason that you go out and buy the iPhone 14 Pro, because honestly, I think the 13 Pro was doing just a fine job. And as I will reiterate, the top 3 things here that we have to go off of this year, in my opinion, are that dynamic island, the camera, and the always on display. Those 3 things right there, if you need those 3 things, then I definitely think maybe you should upgrade to the iPhone 14 Pro. But real quick, I do want to talk about battery life. I don't usually mention this in my 48-hour, 24-hour, 74-hour reviews because it's just really hard to gauge, right? You're setting things up, that's wasting the battery potentially, or you're using it maybe a little different than you used a previous phone. I will say, while I'm not mentioning screen on time numbers, I think that the phone did a phenomenal job. It lasted me all day and then some. I had 0 issues with battery life, but also I will tell you that I had 0 issues on the 13 Pro as well. So I don't know if that really says anything to you, but the battery life is great, okay? It's going to be a good battery. It's a brand new battery, and I think long-term use is the only way that we will tell as if the battery degrades or not enough to make it through a full day or whether or not it's going to last. Okay, so let's talk about upgrading to the iPhone 14 Pro. So if you're on an iPhone 13 Pro, I would recommend to stay there. If you really want the dynamic island and the iPhone 14 Pro, well, okay, that's all right then too, because the dynamic island does add a lot to the mix that you weren't getting on a 13 Pro or 12 Pro or something like that. If you're coming from anything earlier than a 12, I would say this upgrade is definitely going to be a surprisingly good one for you, because coming from like an 11 to a 14, that's a big jump right there. We do have other features like Apple's satellite SOS system, which is going to be live in November, and then we have crash detection, which if you get into a car accident, you're going to have that crash detection and it'll call emergency services for you. Luckily, I haven't had to use fix either of those, and hopefully I won't ever have to test out either of those features, but we have those there as well. And there's a lot of other little features here that kind of just add up to meh to me. I think those top 3 things right there though are definitely good ones. Dynamic Island, always on display, and the camera improvements. Those are going to make the world of difference in your upgrade experience. And if you don't care about any of those 3 things, well then maybe you should reconsider just sticking with your current iPhone that you have right now, because while they're not must-haves, they definitely are things that draw you into the brand new iPhone 14 Pro. So I really want to know what you think about this upgrade right here. Like, I think that it's a nice smartphone. I think that it's the best iPhone ever made. I mean, I'm just saying that in kind of a sarcastic way because it definitely is the best iPhone ever made, and we really don't have to say that every year, because I would hope that Apple didn't get on stage and say, well, this is it's almost better than last year's iPhone. Obviously, they're not going to do that. Obviously, we're going to have pretty significant upgrades in terms of performance and battery life and things like that year over. So with all that said, do you need those 3 things that I mentioned? If you do, this is definitely the phone for you. If you don't, you could probably get away with waiting 1 more year until maybe the iPhone 15 Pro comes out and see what that has to offer. But I think that there definitely are a lot of cool things happening here with this phone, and I would love to know what you think down in those comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the thumbs up button. If you're new around here to the channel, please feel free to subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can be notified when new videos like this drop in the near future. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really do appreciate it. Once again, this is Dom, and I will catch you in the next video.